And so let me begin by thanking Eliot Engel for his work in moving this bipartisan bill forward. The two of us and others on the committee have just returned from Ukraine, and that visit, I think, for all of us underscored the need to reform U.S. international broadcasting. Traveling to eastern Ukraine, our delegation witnessed the Russian propaganda machine, which is now in overdrive, and the attempts by Russia to undermine regional stability. The Russian closure of local Ukrainian radio and television stations, the jamming of uncensored sources of information into the country, all of this demands an effective response. This committee recently worked on legislation signed into law to ramp up programming into Ukraine, but unfortunately, U.S. broadcasters, the Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, and others, are competing with a hand tied behind their back. And that's because the bureaucratic structure over the top of these radios, the Broadcasting Board of Governors, the BBG as it's known, that structure is broken. So while our enemies are working right now 24/7 on their public information campaigns, the organization at the helm of ours meets once a month. Once a month, and often doesn't have a quorum. And that's a recipe for failure. And if we think about some of the witnesses we've heard on this subject, then Secretary Clinton told this committee last year that the BBG, in her words, is practically defunct. Reports from the Inspector General and the GAO have agreed, as does nearly everyone with experience in this field, Republicans or Democrats. This legislation makes dramatic changes to the current organization by clarifying the missions of our U.S. international broadcasters, consolidating 6 organizations into 2. One organization, the United States International Communications Agency, will remain a federal entity and will consist of the Voice of America and the associated technical services our broadcasters depend on. And we make clear that the mission of the Voice of America is to, quote, present the policies of the United States clearly and effectively, exactly as was intended. Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, and the Middle East Broadcasting Network, the so-called surrogates, have, of course, a very different mission: to provide uncensored local news and information to people in closed societies and to be, quote, a megaphone for internal advocates of freedom. So whether it's in Iran or North Korea or elsewhere, that's the intention of these surrogate broadcasts. And these freedom broadcasters, as they're known, will keep their names but consolidate into a private, nonprofit corporation that will become the Freedom News Network. Both the U.S. International Communications Agency and Freedom News Network will now have empowered CEOs at the helm and purely advisory boards. Ripping away the bureaucracy will reduce administrative overlap and allow both organizations to thrive. This legislation also mandates important reforms to the contracting practices of the BBG and increases public-private partnerships. Unlike decades past, today's media landscape is highly competitive. Other countries are sprinting forward. We're still standing still. If we're going to adapt, we need a more effective and efficient use of our finite resources, which this legislation lays out through its mission clarification and management reform. And again, I want to thank Ranking Member Engel, who I now turn to for his remarks.